I'm going to introduce all the panelists at once, just to get it out of the way, and then turn it over to them. We'll first be hearing from Bridget Tolley. Bridget is from the community of Kitigan-Zibi and is a member of Families of Sisters in Spirit, as well as the Justice for Victims of Police Killings Coalition. The banner is up on the wall there of that group with a photo of Bridget's mom, Gladys Tolley. After Bridget, we'll be hearing from Chelsea Vowel. Chelsea is Métis Plains Cree from Lac Ste, Alberta, now based here in Montreal. She teaches Inuit youth who are under child protection, and she blogs quite prolifically about law, culture, language, and deconstructing harmful myths. She has the hope that there can be a restructuring and a renewal of relationship between Canadians and Indigenous peoples. After Chelsea, we'll be hearing from Amanda Lickers, who's right beside me. And Amanda is an anarcho-queer Onondaga woman. She belongs to the Turtle Clan of the Onondaga Nation, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. She is working on a film about current frontline Indigenous struggles, so you should check that out. You can check that out at the website reclaimturtleisland.com, or talk to Amanda afterwards. After Amanda, we'll be hearing from Monge. Mr. Monge is a displaced Indigenous Nahuatl person from Mexico. He's been an asylum seeker here in Canada since 2008. He works closely with undocumented migrants from Mexico and other Latin American countries who are fighting for their inclusion in Canadian society through the process of regularization. And as I said, he's a member of Mexicans United for Regularization, as well as the Status for All campaign. And our final speaker will be Ellen Gabriel. Ellen, a member of Turtle Clan, is an Indigenous human rights activist. She's the former head of Quebec Native Women's Association. She was chosen by the people of the Longhouse of her community in Kanesatake to be the spokesperson during the 1990 Oka crisis. So maybe we can welcome all the panelists together right at the very beginning. And turn over to Bridget Tolley.
Hello, bonjour. Miigwech for being here today. It's an honor and a pleasure for us, for Families of Sisters, to be here today. I want to tell you a little bit about how we got started. First of all, this is my mother, Gladys Tolley. She was struck and killed by the Quebec police in 2001 on my reserve. I've been looking for a public inquiry or an independent investigation since then. When I started, after this happened to my mother, I had a hard time to get the police report, the coroner's report. I had to pay like $1,000 to get the report, and I knew there was something wrong because I had to pay as a family member. So I got very curious and I started out on this journey for justice for my mother. There were so many things wrong. The body was moved about 3-4 times. The time, the date, the address, the police, everything. There was so many mistakes in this case, and I found out it was the brother of the police that killed my mother that was in charge of the scene. And when I found that out, it was purely, we all know it's conflict of interest. And we also have the Native police force, and we had the Montreal police that came in 8 hours later. So we don't have no SIU unit here in Quebec, so we had the Montreal police. So I'm trying to fight for a public inquiry for my mother, and it's against 3 police forces. The Quebec police did Heather, the Native police, and the Montreal police. I don't think it's fair that the government of Quebec be involved in a decision making, especially when it comes to police. They are the employers of the police. The police pay the Sûreté de Québec, they pay the Native police, and they also pay the Montreal police. So when we're asking for independent investigations against the police, Quebec should not be allowed to make a decision in this. It's all conflict of interest. We talk about police investigating police. Well, in my mother's case, it's the brother investigating a brother. So how can it be a fair investigation when it comes to a brother investigating a brother? There wasn't only one brother on the scene, there was 2. So when my mother got struck, they made it sound like my mother got killed because she was a drunken Indian woman, not because she got killed by the police. As soon as they said the first factor was negligence and the second factor was alcohol. So all the responsibility of the police were all gone. It was just like she was a drunken Indian and that's why she died. Well, my mother wasn't a drunken Indian. She was a beautiful woman with 6 children and 18 grandchildren. So I wanted to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. We also lost 2 missing girls from my community. Métis and Shannon Alexander went missing in 2008, and nobody has ever seen them since. What happens to our women? When something like this happens to our women, nobody cares. The media doesn't care. The police don't care, the government doesn't care, and this is why I'm here today, because I care. These women are human beings. They're beautiful women that are loved and have families. In 2010, 2 years after the 2 young girls went missing from my community, we had a baby lion go missing. This baby lion, everybody came looking for the baby lion. We had the police, game wardens, helicopters, media, everybody. But when 2 young girls went missing from my community, nobody was there. There was no media, no search. We have 2 forces of police, the Sûreté de Québec and the Kittigawn-CB. They didn't help. There's still no communication with the families, and this is one thing that the families have been having trouble with since day one, are the people that are supposed to be helping us and protecting us, and it's the police. This is their job to protect us, you know, and for me, I feel they protect their families. The government pays them to protect their families because everybody else, we're on our own, especially Aboriginal women. When we go missing, nobody cares. When something happens to us, they get murdered, nobody cares. It's the family. Families does their own searching. Families does their own, all their own things with no help. So this is why I'm here to support and to help all these families. In 2006, we had started a vigil in honor of our missing and murdered women in Ottawa on Parliament Hill. We had 11 cities. In 2010, the government took away the funding from our Sisters in Spirit because we were raising so much awareness and people were starting to know what was happening to our missing and murdered women that they decided they didn't want us to use the name Sisters in Spirit anymore. It wasn't fair, you know, I started this in honor of these women so they won't be forgotten. And I couldn't handle it. I said it wasn't fair and we wanted to continue and to make sure that our sisters were remembered and honored. And this is when we started Families of Sisters in Spirit. We started it in January of 2011 after the government said no to NWAC for their Sisters in Spirit. Well, I said, oh no, we're alive and we're going to be here. So we started Families of Sisters in Spirit, and we're here, we've been here, we're a grassroots organization, volunteering of families to make sure that our families get the help we need as soon as someone goes missing. We've been helping families, we've been helping with searches, we've been putting missing posters up, we've been doing whatever the family needs to get the word out right away so we can bring home these missing women or the murdered women. We've had so much help from grassroots organizations. I want to say miigwech for everybody that's been supporting us and helping us. Last year, for the past 2 years, we brought in 15 families to Algonquin territory, to Parliament Hill, to come share their stories, and we want to continue to do this. We've been helping as many families as we can all across Canada. We're not just here in the Ottawa or Quebec area. We've been helping families all across Canada, and we want to continue to do this. There's so many missing and murdered Aboriginal women, and we just want to make sure that they're not forgotten. We've been working so hard and we've been doing a lot of events to make sure that Sisters in Spirit is alive and well. So we want to just continue this. I have Colleen Cardinal here. This is her sister. And I'll let her say a few words, okay?
Oh, okay, I'll be really quick. Lansei, Sego, thank you for welcoming to the Monge territory. I became involved in Family Sisters in Spirit 2 years ago. This is my late sister, Métis. She was murdered in Edmonton in 1990, and this is my late sister in Monge. She was actually found murdered outside of Edmonton in a place called Wetaskiwin. Her case is still unsolved, and the media, the subsequent media was, completely just forgot about her, right? And either it's one extreme or the other. Either they're really like portraying our women as deserving of dying, or they don't give us any attention at all. So that's what I do. I speak about that. I'm also a 60 Scoop survivor, and I speak about colonial historical events. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to close today and let you know that Aboriginal women are loved and valued. No more stolen sisters. The most important one, no more silence. Canada, stop this colonial violence now, today. Let's help our sisters. Kitumi Bech for being here.
âpihtawikosisân na eskwela niya ako pamsu eskwela moya nehiawa eskwela. So my name is Chelsea Vowel. I'm from Lac Ste in Alberta, which is a Métis community on North Plains Cree. We speak Cree and we share a lot of the same traditions and customs, but we are different communities. What I wanted to talk to you guys about in my brief time is shifting the discussion away from rights to reciprocal obligations. We talk a lot in social justice circles about rights and about achieving sort of social justice, social equity through a rights-based dialogue. In settler colonial situations, unfortunately, the idea of bringing everybody up to where the mainstream settler colonials are means buying into a system of settler colonialism. The redistribution of wealth is the redistribution of land, and it's stolen land. It's land that was taken away, that has been unceded. It belongs to Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples belong to it. Okay, so we need to come up with a different way of talking about it, because of course we don't want to say, well, forget your rights and forget social justice and let's not try to do anything. But we need to instead think about your position here as being one of forming new relationships rather than trying to get rights, because that rights-based dialogue is really just people scrambling for little bits of the pie, right? It's this whole like 99% thing. That's all about land, right? Because that's where the wealth of like People's Island, Inuit is derived from, the land. So if we're talking about redistributing wealth, redistributing land, we're saying the settler colonial experiment now needs to extend to people who are not originally from, European backgrounds. Everybody needs to come get a slice of the pie. And so we're fighting each other on that level. And I think that instead what we need to be doing is figuring out where we fit on the land together. I don't hear a lot of people from Indigenous, backgrounds talking about sending people away. We're here and we're on the land together. There's no ships waiting to ship people off and we're just going to take over. That's not the point. The point is, how are we going to live together? And one of the examples I wanted to give you is from my territory. We have treaties with the Beaver Nations. Okay. I'm going to use this term, animal nations, because I need you to think of it that way. These are sovereign nations with their own socio-political orders, okay? Conceive of that how you will. It's a metaphor for how they live their lives, right? They have certain rules, they have certain needs, they have a certain relationship with the land. So where I'm from, the relationship, the treaty with the Beaver Nation is that we don't hunt them, because originally the beavers were really, really important in sort of shaping the landscape, right? Beavers build dams, and this creates lakes, and this creates areas where fish can grow. Our people didn't on the prairies didn't have to follow the rivers to everywhere to try to get resources. Instead, the beavers created space so that resources were located within our territories in sustainable ways. So even still, a lot of the old people out there will not eat beaver. You go to other areas and it's a different relationship, right? The diversity of land is really, really important because it engenders a diversity of culture. Indigenous peoples are as diverse as the landscape because of the landscape. So wherever you live in Canada, you have to become aware of the landscape, and you have to become aware of the relationships that exist there that are founded on the socio-political orders of the treaties between Indigenous peoples and animal and plant nations. And that might sound like a lot of blah, blah, blah. Okay, but think about colonial systems of law. What are they founded on? Okay, they're founded on very, very old notions that if you don't exploit land, then you lose it, right? In order to be a real human being, you have to exploit the land and exert dominance over it. So there's this underlying philosophy, right? So the philosophy that underlies a lot of Indigenous socio-political orders is different. It's not about exerting dominance over the land. It's not about putting yourself above any of the other plant or animal nations. It's not about putting yourself above the landscape because we don't exist, outside of the landscape. Even when you're in the city, you don't exist outside of the landscape. You're still being sustained by the land, the water, the food, everything, right? And that's easy to forget and it's easy to gloss over, especially when you're in the city. So when we talk about showing solidarity with Indigenous peoples, we're talking about concrete things, and it has to involve the land. And that gets missed a lot because we talk about decolonization of the mind. And I urge you to read a fantastic article by Tuck and somebody whose name I can't remember, which is Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. Because in social justice circles, we really do talk about decolonization too broadly, okay? But in the settler colonial situation, decolonization means redistributing the land, reestablishing relationships between people, the land, the plant and animal nations, and that involves everybody who has come here, everybody who is non-Indigenous or is Indigenous from other areas. And it means that you actually have to put some effort in beyond saying that you acknowledge that you're on somebody's territory. The acknowledgement is the first step, but it's meaningless if it's not followed up with action. So, okay, concrete ways to do that, because a lot of people are like, well, what do we do? Well, every nation has its own socio-political order. Okay, I've alluded to that before. The diversity is as diverse as the landscape. So whatever territory you're in, whether you are from that territory, because I'm not from this territory, right? My traditions are vested in another area of land. But currently I'm living on somebody else's land. So the socio-political traditions that I need to be following, the relationships that I need to respect are based on the land here. And so who do you go to find out about those things? Well, you go to the people whose land you're on. And there are many, many times where Indigenous nations are reaching out to people and saying, look, we want to teach you about the land. But there's so many other distractions. There's so many other things that, I don't know how many times, that these educational workshops have been put out and stuff, and there's hardly anybody there. This is not a side issue. This is not just one more minority asking for space. This is the foundation of this land. And everybody who comes here, whether they know nothing about Indigenous issues at all, or whether they're fairly well versed, need to dig further. So I would ask you, after this, to wherever you're from, whether you're returning to your home here in Montreal, or you're going somewhere else, I want you to look into how you can actually learn about our socio-political orders. Because there is room for a diversity of socio-political orders in these lands. This idea that Canada is this unified nation, nobody who actually knows anything about the history of Canada can actually buy that, right? Even if you completely ignore Indigenous reality and you just look at the formation of provinces and territories and regions and stuff in Canada, there is no unification. I think Quebec gets that better than most places. Right? So get that idea of this unified nation state out of your mind, where we all have to have like one political order, the federal, state, and the provincial government and that sort of thing. And consider the fact that that's not actually how we run our lives anyway, right? Because I think there's a lot of fear about the idea of allowing space for Indigenous law. there should be no fear, because the Indigenous law it's not going to be a situation where you're going from this idea of a nation state in one area to a communist dictatorship. That's all like European stuff, okay? That's not what it's about at all. And I urge you to learn about these things because we do have very rich legal traditions, and a lot of scholars have been working on bringing these traditions forward in a way that can be understood by people who don't come from those backgrounds, because it has been actively repressed. So if you're interested, I'll give you some names. There's Val Napoleon, who works on Indigenous legal orders for the Gitstan. Okay, she's kind of looked at how they form and maintain their relationships and what that has to do with the land. You have people like John Burroughs, who is Anishinaabe, who also does amazing work on actually articulating Anishinaabe law. Okay, you have many Mohawk scholars who can give you information about the Mohawk perspective, the Mohawk conceptions of reciprocal obligations, and how the legal orders are used. So what I'd like you all to do, whether your families have been here for generations or you're like, you just got here last week, I want you all to consider yourself to be immigrants. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Why am I using the word immigrant? Indigenous peoples are peoples who have creation stories about how they came here. Okay? Settlers are people who have stories of colonization about how they came here. And immigrants, quite often, are here because of colonization in their own lands. Right? The displacement and the movement is very much caused by colonization, external to, aided, abetted by Canada, right? But it's all interrelated. So if you come here and you're non-Indigenous, consider yourself an immigrant. That doesn't make you less obligated, it doesn't make you less part of the land, but it's going to be harder for you to make those connections. And Indigenous peoples and our socio-political orders are one way in which you can get into that, get into those relationships. Stop talking about rights, start talking about what do you owe the land, what do you owe your fellow human beings, your fellow plant nations, your fellow animal nations, okay? What else I really wanted to say? Not really. I mean, I just want people to stop talking. I really do. I love the words that we use, sovereignty, self-determination, but the words get old and stale when they don't get used to mean anything. And that's what's happening to those words right now. A lot of people don't even want to talk about the word sovereignty because it's been so infected by this idea of nation states. So let's stop using those words. Let's go and start using our words. Okay? Start learning some of the Indigenous principles. Don't translate them. Learn them. Learn them and understand that they're different. And don't import European notions or other philosophies into it. Learn what it means for us here and what it can mean for you.
Just before introducing the next speaker, there's some tweeting going on, which was encouraged by our panelists. So, what hashtag are you using?
Soul City.
Sol City, SOL City, and Solidarity's Cité Sans Frontières or Solidarity Cross Borders has a Twitter which is Solidarité MTL without the accent. So Solidarité MTL. So Chelsea and Amanda have been tweeting a lot up here. In case you're wondering, they're not tweeting back home, but they're tweeting what people are saying, and you're encouraged to do so as well if that makes sense. So our next speaker is Amanda. Yeah.
Yeah. Sego Sewa Guego. Ya de waga dirty anade sini waxanoda no kohoineha. Genyodo onadowaga hodanashoni and Amanda Yunches. So I was just speaking to y'all in Ganigaha, which is the Mohawk language, but I actually belong to the Onondaga Nation of the Western Doorkeepers of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I also belong to the Turtle Clan, and I don't know my Indigenous name yet, but it's coming, working on it. So I just want to also acknowledge the voices that came before me today, and I always love hearing the Hondagardi Wadekwa, and that's really the best way to open things. So, and Bridget and Chelsea, your words are powerful, and so are your voices. So, Nyamagoa. Some things that I wanted to talk about today included relationships, which kind of pulls from what you were saying, and just sort of this idea of rights versus responsibilities, and what does it mean to be responsible. And I think one of the key pieces is if you don't have relationships, with the land or with the people who are of the land, then it's really difficult to be accountable to the systems of power at play. And so a lot of people might feel that, you know, something like a Solidarity Across Borders conference and migrant justice and Indigenous sovereignty don't make sense going together, you know, but I think that's absolutely incorrect, because there's a mutual enemy, and it's called the state of Canada, you know, and the ways in which the settler colonial empires of both the United States and Canada have used borders as, like, in that statement is really great. Your statement's really good. The ways in which borders not only displace people from their own territories and their own nations, but are used to actively criminalize brown and black and Indigenous bodies, you know, and as well as enforced by the police state. These are all things that are very, very important that we have to take to heart and understand how migrant justice and Indigenous sovereignty intersect, because under the Great Law, like, everyone's welcome. The roots of peace extend, you know, to all nations who want to accept it. So there are governance systems that already exist here. And I think that it's precarious because the way that the Canadian state positions itself, I think that there is an active interest in trying to disassociate these two movements and try to create division between us, when really there is an inherent tie. And so even just like being in a city itself, it's something folks were talking a lot about the land earlier, you know, especially Chelsea. And I just, like, when I'm looking outside, and especially while Ellen was doing the âpihtawikosisân and just thinking about creation and my relationships to the natural world and the ways in which I have to respect natural law as an Oklahoma woman, and what that means for me in my life and in my community, and just seeing these skyscrapers, you know, it's really violent. And I think that we need to be relentlessly critical of our relationships to cities and centering our goals for solidarity within a city, because this is still stolen land, and these buildings are active theft, you know? And so when we are bringing ourselves to invest in systems that, in ways of living and being that actively displace and destroy, we need to be really critical of that, and how can we move beyond it, you know? And so there's so many different ways that we can like reach out to each other. And I think that if we're not actively building relationships that center decolonization and mutual aid, then there's something very, very wrong. And I think it definitely feels like very abstract sometimes, because it's like the Canadian state seems like this, you know, omnipotent, omnipresent entity that can literally take people from their families. They can put people into solitary confinement for like months, you know. They can cut you off and they can deport you. They can try to steal your self-determination over your own body, and they can try to destroy your sense of nationhood and your own identity, you know. And so that's a lot of really big stuff. So we have to work together, and we have to figure out how to concretely work in solidarity, in the spirit of mutual aid. And I think that if we can commit to decolonization, then like we're in a much better space, because I definitely feel that indigeneity is beyond, you know, Turtle Island. There's folks who are Indigenous to these territories here, and there are stories that tell me where I come from, and other folks have stories that tell them where they come from as well. And so we have to honor each other's stories and find ways of working together with a sense of responsibility. And in order to be responsible to one another, we have to be accountable. And in order to be accountable, we have to have relationships. And so if we don't have relationships with the peoples whose territories we're occupying, then there's no way you can be in solidarity with those people in a meaningful sense, you know, aside from like the token acknowledgement or, you know, understanding that this is stolen land and having a lot of rhetoric. But if there isn't on-the-ground relationships, because the struggle for self-determination and sovereignty is about survival. In order to survive, we have to also spend a lot of time working within our nations and healing each other, because there's the trauma of colonization is intergenerational. And in order, like, it's just like families of sisters in spirit, you know, learning our languages, knowing our traditions, being able to grow our life sustainers, you know, the three sisters, and have a relationship with our territories. These are the things that we need in order to be sovereign, in order to self-determine. And if we can't have these things, then that's a result of apartheid, that's a result of colonization, that's a result of assimilation. The fact that I don't speak my language has everything to do with the Canadian state occupying our territories. And so I feel that solidarity is about ensuring that the voices of those who are most affected are elevated. And in order, like, basically, y'all need to help out, you know, like, just step up and help out, because it's a lot of work trying to figure this stuff out. And when people are on survival mode all the time and like running campaigns to have justice for their families, for their sisters, for their mothers, you know, and at the same time trying to like stop the tar sands, you know, it's a lot of work. And so like we need capacity from allies sorry, I'm like stumbling over my words, but we need to build that capacity for justice, you know. And speaking of the tar sands, because we need to talk about the tar sands, that shit's not gonna shut itself down. so we've like it's just like, for instance, Suncor, there's a refinery here in Montreal, and guess what? Line 9 is probably gonna get reversed. I'm trying really hard. Lots of people are trying really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. And like Line 9 is all about environmental racism and continuing the slow industrial genocide known as the tar sands. There's another pipeline that's going to be coming out these territories ways, the Energy East, and we need to try to stop these things. And there's places where we can focus our dissent, where we can focus our resistance, and try to have economic impacts on these corporations that seem so benevolent. And this is all interconnected. So environmental justice is supporting Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty, because we are the land. And by supporting Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty, you're also supporting the migrant justice movement, because guess what? We don't use borders like that. We don't patrol them with drones. That's not how we roll, you know? So I don't know if there's really much else I have to say. Yeah, I think I want to hear from other people too. So I think that's what I have to say for now. I hope that's okay.
Our next speaker is Monge, and Monge is a displaced Nahuatl from Mexico who's an asylum seeker here in Montreal. Mr. Monge will be speaking in mainly in Spanish, maybe in Nahuatl as well, and Andrea will be translating towards English from Spanish.
Buenos días a todos. Les doy gracias a los organizadoras, y a todos los que están presentes para permitir pasar mi mensaje.
Good morning to everyone. I want to thank all the organizers and everyone who's here for letting me speak today.
Voy a mencionar un concepto de lo que es la migración, y bueno, después los efectos y consecuencias debido a las políticas y los desplazamientos principalmente indígenas de las grandes transnacionales, sobre todo las mineras.
So I'm going to talk about the concept of migration, the effect and consequences of the policies that lead to that, and the displacement of Indigenous communities because of transnational corporations.
La migración más importante desde el siglo XIX hasta la época actual es la que se conoce como éxodo rural, que es el desplazamiento masivo de los habitantes del medio rural al urbano.
So So one of the most important movements of migration that's happened is the rural exodus that's been happening since the 16th century. And it's a movement of people from like rural areas into city areas.
En donde millones de personas se trasladan anualmente del campo a la ciudad en todos los países del mundo, sobre todo en los países subdesarrollados, en busca de mejores condiciones de vida y sobre todo de mayores oportunidades de empleo.
It is a movement of yearly of millions of people are from the city, from the countryside to the city, in all the countries in the world, especially in underdeveloped countries, and they're looking for better conditions of life and better opportunities for employment.
La migración es consecuencia de las políticas de globalización de países principalmente desarrollados en países vías de desarrollo.
Migration is a consequence of policies of globalization, especially in developed countries, that leads countries in the process of development to move.
Que se llevan a cabo a través de tratados, programas, con la finalidad de sobreexplotar los recursos naturales y aprovecharse de la mano de obra barata y así llevarse enormes ganancias las compañías transnacionales.
This is done through treaties and programs that are exploiting the natural resources and trying to take advantage of the cheap labor, so they can take a lot of money and wealth. So the transnational corporations can take a lot of money and wealth.
Voy a empezar hablando sobre el tratado sobre el TLCAN, que es el Tratado de Libre Comercio, que se estableció en 1994 con la finalidad de reducir la migración, 2/4 partes de la migración mexicana, aumentar el nivel de vida de los trabajadores con la creación de empleos.
I'm going to start talking about the treaty, the free trade agreement that happened in 1994 with Mexico. The treaty was meant to cut half of the migration of Mexicans into the United States.
Esta política o este tratado entre los tres países, Canadá, México y Estados Unidos, produjo una gran catástrofe de migración, ya que del 2001 al 2005 desplazó hacia Estados Unidos 2.800.000 mexicanos.
This treaty led to a catastrophe of migration between 2001 and 2005. 2,800,000 people were displaced from the United States to Mexico.
Lo que nos damos cuenta que en vez de producir, de generar empleos para el mejoramiento del nivel de vida, ocasionó una gran catástrofe de migración.
So instead of leading to better employment, it actually led to a catastrophe of migration.
Lo que ocasionó en 1996 el surgimiento del pueblo indígena en Chiapas, que se llama STLN, ya que como pueblo indígena el sistema capitalista consideraba que estos pueblos, o ha considerado que estos pueblos no producen para el capital y por lo tanto tienen que desaparecerse, ya que solamente representan un número.
This led to the rise in 1996 of the ISLN in Chiapas as an indigenous movement, because the capitalism does not believe that indigenous peoples can produce, so they're just a number that don't matter.
Otro de los tratados, el Plan Puebla-Panamá del 2001, que surge del 2001, en donde la idea otra vez es de hacer un proyecto de desarrollo sustentable y con responsabilidad al medio ambiente,
There's another movement that comes up in 2001, which is Puebla Panama, Plan Puebla Panama, and the idea is to create sustainable projects that take care of the environment.
En donde comprendía todo el sureste de México y 7 países de Centroamérica, hasta Panamá.
It involved most of the south part of Mexico and 7 countries in Central America, all the way to Panama.
Básicamente este proyecto fue el despojo de las tierras de los campesinos para construir grandes carreteras, aeropuertos, puertos marítimos, maquiladoras y así el flujo de la mercancía y capitales, que es el libre mercado, sin ningún derecho a la protección del ser humano.
So what this led was to the displacement of many indigenous people because they started building highways, maquiladoras, a lot of buildings, and basically the idea was to make it easy for wealth to move and for without respecting the rights of indigenous peoples.
Y bueno, en el 2008 hay un plan que se llama Plan Mérida, en donde básicamente Estados Unidos es el que apoya más fuerte, en un principio con 1.6 billones de dólares para asesorar, para dar estrategias militares, así como enviar helicópteros y estrategias de tortura que estuvo implicado la DEA y la CIA.
In 2008, Plan Mérida, which was supported, came to be, which was supported by the United States through $1.6 billion to assess the military, to send helicopters, and to teach strategies of torture.
Que ocasionó miles y miles de mexicanos asesinados, ya que después de estas políticas el pueblo, las organizaciones se estaban organizando y bueno, el gobierno mexicano junto con el estadounidense y el canadiense tuvieron que hacer una estrategia para dispersar estos movimientos.
This led to the killing of thousands and thousands of Mexicans, after which the people organized to try to fight this, and the governments from the United States and Mexico had to organize against them to stop these movements from rising up.
Y de esta manera, aproximadamente 50,000 mexicanos entran a Canadá.
And that is how 50,000 Mexicans come into Canada.
Ahora voy a hablar acerca de los efectos de las grandes compañías mineras que, pues desgraciadamente, Canadá es el que tiene el 77% de las concesiones en nuestro territorio indígena, ya que estas empresas llegan a instalar sus industrias en los territorios indígenas.
I'm going to talk now about the effects of the mining corporations. Canada has 77% of the control of them in Indigenous territory, because they come here and they take over the land.
Y bueno, hasta esa fecha habían 30 millones de hectáreas de concesiones de tierras actualmente asciende a 56 millones y se calcula que puede llegar hasta 90 millones de hectáreas.
So before there was only 30 million acres that were given to the mining corporations. Today it's up to 56 million and it's projected to go up to 90 million.
En donde estas compañías ofrecen solamente o han ofrecido 300,000 trabajos temporales hasta por un lapso de 20 años.
These companies only offer 30,000 temporary employment that can last up to 20 years.
Lo que el país necesita, alrededor de 2 millones de empleos. Por lo tanto, las compañías mineras no están apoyando al empleo.
But the reality is that the country actually needs 2 million jobs. So these mining companies are not even supporting creating new employment for people.
Y por lo contrario, todas estas empresas llevan a cabo sus proyectos a cielo abierto.
And a lot of these corporations do their business with open pit mines.
En donde utilizan el cianuro, donde un filósofo, Gerardo Pérez Muñoz, destaca que para producir 1 gramo de oro se utiliza 1 kilogramo de cianuro, que puede matar hasta 30,000 personas.
They use cyanide for this, for the open pit mines. And there's a philosopher called Gerardo Pérez Muñoz who says that to produce 1 gram of gold, you need to use 1 kilogram of cyanide, which could kill up to 30,000 people.
Ya que este químico es muy tóxico y que fue utilizado para el genocidio de la Segunda Guerra Mundial.
And this chemical is very dangerous and very toxic, and it was even used during the genocide of World War II.
Solo para recordar, Canadá fue prohibido, Canadá, Europa y China fue prohibido utilizar este producto en el 2011 y ellos no trabajan, las compañías mineras no está prohibido producir o extraer el metal como el oro y la plata a cielo abierto.
In 2001, Europe, China, and Canada prohibited the use of this chemical. It's also prohibited to do open pit mines.
Ya que aparte de contaminar, aparte de ser contaminante este producto, ha ocasionado grandes catástrofes de montañas.
Besides being very dangerous and toxic, it also has caused a lot of mountain catastrophes.
Han secado ríos.
It's dried rivers.
Y toda la biodiversidad de estas tierras.
And all the biodiversity of these lands.
Actualmente México ocupa el segundo lugar en la enfermedad del cáncer.
Today, Mexico has the second place in the amount of cancers
Debido a estos productos químicos y también la diabetes.
because of this, because of the use of these chemicals, and they also have really high diabetes.
Y bueno, lo que nos damos cuenta es que todos estos programas de políticas transnacionales, tanto de Estados Unidos como de Canadá, la verdad no nos ha llevado a generar empleos para nuestro nivel de vida.
What we realize is that all these programs by transnational corporations has not led to better jobs.
Sino el catástrofe de nuestras tierras, de nuestros ríos y todo el animal marino, así como enfermedades.
But actually it's led to a catastrophe of our lands, of our lives, of all the living species in our land.
Y miles de indígenas y campesinos que son desplazados hacia las ciudades y después a estos países como Canadá y Estados Unidos.
And also has led to the displacement of thousands and thousands of indigenous peoples who've moved to cities and later to countries like this one.
Y bueno, después somos encarcelados y deportados.
And later we're put in jails and deported.
Por lo que estamos en una etapa de genocidio y de genocidio humano silencioso.
We're in a stage of a silent human genocide.
Y bueno, ahora somos como nos han desintegrado totalmente nuestras familias, nuestros pueblos, y ahora somos como unos nómadas errantes, que no tenemos tierra, no tenemos ni el menor sustento.
And this led to our complete disintegration. Today we're, of our families from our land, today we're like roaming nomads with no land and no ways to be connected to our land.
Y bueno, ahora nos regresamos a nuestro lugar de origen, pero no tenemos cómo sobrevivir. Y le doy gracias a todas las mujeres que se han levantado para luchar, ya que para nosotros como indígenas el quitarnos la tierra es como un bebé que le están quitando su madre, y por lo tanto le dejan en la total desprotección y le quitan la vida.
So I want to thank all the women who've rise up to fight. Because of indigenous peoples, if our land is taken, it's like if a child is taken from their mother, they lose all their ability to survive and their ability to be touched, connected to the land.
Les pido que intenten comprar menos, llenarse menos de información que no nos sirve.
I ask that you buy less and that you fill your heads with information, that you don't fill your heads with information that you don't need.
ya que el sistema o el gran capital o las grandes capitales o las grandes empresas transnacionales nos han hecho ser esclavos de lo que producimos.
Because the system, the great capital, the transnational corporations have made us slaves of the things that they produce.
Y pensamos mucho, pero sentimos muy poco, desgraciadamente.
We think a lot, but we feel too little, sadly.
Creo que hay alternativas, podemos hacer muchas cosas si cada uno de nosotros empieza a pasar pequeños mensajes de que todos nos necesitamos.
I think there's alternatives. I think if we all, we can do things, like if we send messages to each other, that we can support each other.
Y tenemos que unirnos y solidarizarnos todos los grupos. Gracias.
We need to be united and we have to work in solidarity. Thank you.
I notice people standing in the back. There's plenty of seats just around this area here. If you want to come up now, it's a good time. It'll be less distracting. And our last speaker will be Ellen Gabriel.
Thank you very much to the previous speakers, and it's encouraging for me, having been at this for 23 years, to see young women picking up the torch to speak for our people. And I want to thank our previous speakers. And I have to apologize because I'm not very good with names. I'm not good with faces. For the message that he brought to us and that our people have been saying for many years. Our elders tell us that what is underneath the ground should remain in the ground. Otherwise, it will bring sickness. And you know, the colonizers and the corporations who exploit people's poverty, who exploit the fact that people need jobs, don't care about that. They don't care that our children are getting sicker. They don't care that the land and the waters that we depend on are being contaminated. They don't care. People like Stephen Harper, George Bush, those kinds of people who live on this planet only want to exploit because they have no vision. Their minds are clouded by greed, racism, misogynists, and the relationship that we have with each other. We as Indigenous people, with the people who are descendants of the Europeans, people who are coming from other countries to find a better life here in Canada, you can equate our relationship in some ways to a building. And Canadians are in the basement part of an elevator. And you're pressing the buttons, but you're only moving for that one spot. And Indigenous peoples are on the top floor waiting for you to hear us, to see us, to listen to us. And the reason why I say that is because I was born in 1959. I'm part of the tail end of the baby boomers. I was 4 years old when John F. Kennedy died, and my mother used to let us sometimes watch TV. And one morning, Captain Kangaroo was interrupted for the funeral of John F. Kennedy. And later on, I learned about Martin Luther King. And I'm a child, I'm a child trying to digest this. And I hear about Martin Luther King being killed because he's black and he's standing up for his people. And as I get older, the hippie movement comes. And they talk about peace and love. And they talk about not being like the man. You know, anyone over 30 you can't trust. And then as a teenager, or as in my early 20s, there's the no nuke protests. And every single movement that has come, whether it's the Black Civil Rights Movement, whether it's leadership or even pop culture, Indigenous people have been forgotten, excluded, and invisible in. And so we invite you into our homes. We invite you into our homes, and I don't say buildings necessarily, but the land that our ancestors cultivated, took care of, before your ancestors arrived on our shores. And we ask that you understand and listen the reason why it was so beautiful was because we understood the land. We had a great respect for all our relations. The fish in the oceans, the rivers. We understand the water in the Haudenosaunee, people of the Longhouse. We have a tiny drum, and it's filled with water. Just as a mother has her water enveloping her baby as it's growing inside her. And I can tell you that little water drum can resonate in a building, sometimes even more powerful than a big drum. And so the relationship that we have been trying to get with Europeans and their descendants for over 500 years has not gotten any better. Why? Because of ignorance, because of racism, because we are the ones to be afraid of. We are the ones that make you uncomfortable. We are the ones that make you realize that your country is based on violence. Your country is founded on 3 legal fictions: the doctrine of discovery, terra nullius, the doctrine of conquer. And they continue to tell it to your children. In the schools, history is no different than what's being taught today than it was 40 years ago. Why? Because of ignorance. Because the ministers of education and every single prime minister that has been prime minister of Canada has been too damn lazy to do his research, to do his homework, to tell his people the truth of what Canada is based on. And it's not just Canada as a state. It's England. It's France. And it's other European countries who continue to think that Canada is fresh for the plunder still in 2013. I read something not too long ago that China is looking for a partner to develop resources in Canada because Stephen Harper welcomed development in Canada. Canada is a big country, but I wonder if we really did the research. How many of the waters in Canada could we drink from? How much of the land could we actually have real organic gardens in? And so it really saddens me when I go to schools, supposed to be places of higher education. It's just a word. It's just semantics. Because all it is producing the same kind of colonized, ignorant, discriminatory, sexist, racist thinking against Indigenous people by excluding us from your history. Instead, we've become an industry for academics. Oh yes, let's research Aboriginal people. And oh, we could get their partnership. So let's go to their communities, pick the brains of the elders, give them some tobacco. And then we're going to go around and we're going to have a 6-figure income because we're going to become the Indian experts. And the reason why I'm so cynical is because it still continues today. We have been the most researched group of people in this world, and we have nothing to show for it. Instead, we have divisions that are created by colonial structures like the Indian Act band councils. Instead, our languages are more threatened, and yet we're supposed to speak French, and if we don't speak French, we don't get a job. I was schooled in English, just like the Cree, just like the Mi'kmaq, the Inuit, and on my own home territory, I cannot find a job unless I speak French. But even if I speak French, or even if I speak English, with my reputation, I don't think too many people will hire me anyways. So how do we get to where we want to go in that elevator? So you can meet us on an equal footing. Well, how many of you here are professors? Okay, so the professors in higher education didn't feel this was important enough for them. How many of you here have children? How many of you here have grandchildren? How many of you want to be parents one day? And how many of you want justice for everybody? So you see yourself as a pebble being put into the ocean. And what you learn today, as parents, you bring it to your children's institutions. As a student, how many of you here are students of Concordia or McGill, or UQAM, or U of M, or other universities? You bring it to your teachers. And if history is going to be taught properly in the schools, you help us get the curriculum by Indigenous academics and not the Minister of Education's academics. Because I have spoken to several ministers of education, and they keep telling us, and they pat us on the head, and they tell us, oh, don't worry, we have the academics that will write the history for you. Well, that's the problem. That's been the whole problem all along. And it's not just education we should be looking at, it's popular culture. Because popular culture dictates Canadian culture. Whether it's borrowing from the Americans, and that culture can be mining, that culture can be sweatshops in India or China to have your fancy clothes, and we're all guilty of it. Don't anybody point fingers at another one, because we're all guilty of it. That culture can be entertainment. And I've always wanted the entertainment industry to give to Indigenous people's education institutions, because they have benefited so much from our lands. Because I don't want to take the dirty money anymore from Alcor that we see Inspire or the Aboriginal Achievement Awards take, or the National Aboriginal Organizations take from Alcor, from Suncor, from all these other places, because government says you have to partner with a private industry. I want to see the entertainment industry do something, because they're just as responsible for all their spaghetti westerns in creating the propaganda that has stereotyped Indigenous peoples in this country, indeed in this world. And I am tired. I am tired after 23 years of having to start always from the beginning when I address a crowd. How many of you know about the Indian residential school system? So not everybody does. If you could flip to one of the slides that I have. There's a document, you can keep going. So if you could stop, you could go, yeah, we can stay there. I want to tell you something that I think still resonates today in education. Duncan Campbell Scott, who was the first Minister of Indian Affairs, he said, I wanted to get rid of the Indian problem. I do not think that, as a matter of fact, that the country ought to continuously protect a class of people who are able to stand alone. Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic. And there is no Indian question and no Indian department. Well, I can agree with him on one thing. I wish there was no Indian department. 67% of the budget spent for Indigenous peoples in Canada is taken by the Department of Indian Northern Affairs Canada and the different regions throughout Canada. We get the crumbs. And the budget that comes to our communities is from a resource fund, trust fund that was created in 1886. We don't take your tax-paying money. But yet when election time comes around, we're not even on the issues of most politicians. And so those of you who, if you ever get a chance to talk to Justin Trudeau, ask him, if you're just about the middle class, then what about everybody else? If that's who you're going to represent, then perhaps you should go back to school and learn about the real history of Canada. And by the way, take Stephen Harper with you. What's going on in this world today, as our brother from Mexico has stated, no, it doesn't just happen in Mexico, it's been happening in Canada and in the Americas for centuries. And we call it colonization, but it's just pure evil. It's pure evil, it's pure sinisterism, and it's nothing different. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I'm going to take a risk. Because I see no difference in the pain and suffering that happened against the Jews in World War II than the suffering that Indigenous people have had to endure in the Americas. And there should be a Holocaust museum in Canada and the United States, and indeed throughout the Americas. Because maybe then, the average Joe on the street, next time we put a barricade, next time we put up a protest, won't say, what do those damn Indians want now? We want our dignity to be able to teach our children their languages. We want to be able to be the stewards of the land as our ancestors were, to protect the land, to protect the waters. Because this is insanity. Why are there not more people in the street protesting against these mining corporations, against these sweatshops by fashionistas? We're poisoning our waters. We are poisoning the land. Why are not more people outraged? Why? Because they come up to you and say, we can give you a job. We can give you a $60,000 a year job. Imagine all the clothes you could buy. Imagine the kind of good things you can buy. And nobody's against having good lives for their children. Nobody's against having a quality life. It's how it's obtained. It's not easy to find a job nowadays. And so TransCanada Pipelines and Enbridge have come into Mohawk territory and they've said, hey, we can give you jobs. And as our brother from Mexico said, they're temporary jobs. But on top of that, they're jobs for men. You know, maybe they'll give the women the stop sign, stop and go, stop and go. But I think Chelsea said it before, or Amanda. We've lost the humanity in human rights. We've lost the humanity that should have been there when our ancestors met your ancestors. And I said it once, I'll say it again. We should have assimilated your ancestors. But they were too damn wicked. They were too foolish to see the gifts that our people had to give. They only saw the land and how they could exploit it. And we have to stop that. We have to be outraged. We have to stop criminalizing people who are protectors of the land. We have to get educated, and our people need to be educated as well. Because we have our people who are saying the same thing as, I need a job, I don't care, but if you sit on your hands for your rights, you're going to sit there and not do a thing to protect your rights, then you should not complain when you no longer have those rights. We have one planet to live on. We're not going to go to Mars. We're not going to be able to live on the moon. And if there is colonies on the moon, you can be sure it's going to be for the rich people, like the guy who's the head of Cirque du Soleil. I wish one day that I could just concentrate on my art, that I could just teach art to children and to my elders, and to be able to sit with them and not have to worry about the continual encroachment by companies like GDB Construction, or ignorant mayors like the municipality of Okas. Jesus, it's 2013. You think we'd be more advanced now, but we're going backwards. We are not going forward. So I ask that you be part of the change, and don't depend on someone else to protect your rights. It's up to every single one of you that are here. So I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank Jaggi for all the great work that he's been doing, and for the organizers of this event. So
The people who spoke earlier want to add anything or say anything based on other things they had heard. Want to offer that space now? We can do that later too. You guys are good?
Oh, are we about
Yeah.
There was two things I wanted to talk about, and like also Nyola, Ellen. That was really amazing. One thing that I wanted to really stress, and like there's kind of been this ongoing theme around education and educating ourselves, like also in Oklahoma communities. You know, there's a lot of work that we have to do within our own communities, our own peoples around colonization and undoing that stuff. But also for folks who are living on stolen territories, it is really important that you have an understanding of the context here. And that is your responsibility to understand. When I say intergenerational trauma of colonization, that should mean something to you. It should mean a lot of things, you know? And so not only do you have a responsibility to find out about, I'm not gonna swear, but like Duncan Scott and like Indian affairs and that entire process of colonization and apartheid system and assimilation and all that stuff, but also you have a responsibility to educate other people. Like truth telling is crucial, and it is way too often that people stand by in silence. You know, and silence is also violence, you know, in those moments. So I wanted to really clearly articulate that. And then another thing too, around my migration, just like hearing, I guess Monge like talk about that his experiences with being displaced from his territories, and just like understanding that the colonial borders that exist on Turtle Island not only impact us as human beings, as Indigenous peoples, like as someone who belongs to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, like I am estranged from my ancestral territories of the Western Door as a result of the colonial border. But also, you know, recently I saw there was this image of an ocelot that had been shot or hit by a car on a highway down in the south. And so it's not just human nations that have been impacted by the border and the violence of the border, and that animals don't know that, you know? Animal nations are too wise to recognize those borders, but they still experience the violence of them. And so, and just to sort of broaden that, and like that fluidity across Turtle Island and the nation-to-nation relationships that existed here before you know, Europeans came and really messed things up, meant that we would travel a lot to see each other. Like this is a wampum shell, which if you don't know what wampum is, then you should check it out. But I was recently in Elsie Booktook in Mi'kmaq territories, and the stories that were shared with me there about where this came from just like solidified some things I had suspected for a really long time around what those relationships look like and how old they are, you know? So I just wanted to say that about the border and truth-telling and responsibilities for that.
The other panelists want to add anything at this page? Carmel? Mr. Monge.
Quisiera aclarar que lógicamente que yo hablé de las compañías mineras que están afectando en México, pero por supuesto que a nivel global afectan a todo el mundo.
I just want to clarify that I spoke about transnational corporations, the mining corporations affecting Mexico, but obviously they are also everywhere else in the world.
Yo pienso que en este planeta es un equilibrio tanto de todos los seres vivos, y lo estamos desequilibrando con estas empresas mineras y todos los productos transgénicos que nos están obligando a consumir.
I believe that this planet has to be in equilibrium, and that we're breaking that equilibrium because of all these transnational mining corporations and all the transgenic foods that we're eating, that we're being forced to eat.
Ya que, como la compañera dijo, que no es un desarrollo hacia la construcción de nuestro planeta, es un retroceso, ya que lo estamos destruyendo, lo estamos desequilibrando a través de la destrucción de las montañas, la contaminación de los ríos, todas las enfermedades, ya que actualmente no tenemos una vida más de 60 años.
So, like someone else said, like Ellen said, we're not moving forward, moving backwards by breaking this balance because of these mining corporations, because of transnationals, because of how we're affecting the land.
Nuestros antepasados vivían 80 hasta 100 años y sin necesidad de estar con una atención médica. Entonces, yo también estoy de acuerdo que tenemos que estar enojados, pero no solo enojados. Y no solamente tenemos que salir a las calles, sino tenemos que exigir. Tenemos que exigir nuestra soberanía, nuestra libertad, nuestra autonomía, porque los gobiernos capitalistas y colonialistas no nos dan de buena forma, de buena manera lo que tenemos, sino que nos imponen. Gracias.
So he mentioned that people are living less now, and then before people could live longer without the need of doctors, and also that we should be enraged, that we should be going on the streets, but also that we should be demanding for ourselves our liberty, our autonomy, because the capitalist and colonialist governments are taking it away from us, and that we should be demanding for those things.
Let's take a first round of questions or comments. Try to keep them as brief as you can. We'll maybe take 3 together, and then have the panelists respond. So, does anyone want to get it going? Okay, maybe we'll start from Ellen and come this way, and you can address all 3 or 1 or 2 of them.
Well, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is not really a reconciliation commission. It's a lot of survivors of residential school, those that are living, talking their truth. But if they name somebody who is still alive, who abused them, they go in camera and they're not allowed to talk about that person. So there's no reconciliation. And with all due respect to Phil Fontaine, I remember at a U of M conference he stated that the government of Canada would not accept any criminalization of the abusers of children. So they had to accept that term in order to get the TRC started. It's not a reflection on the commissioners, it's not a reflection on the survivors. Reconciliation, perhaps it's not the right word, but reconciliation means internationally anyways that there is either compensation or you get land back. And there's been none of that. The damages to our languages, to our culture, to our sexuality, to our spirit, our very essence of our being. We need to have some kind of process that is much better than the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because Canada will not allow it to go further. So maybe something will grow from that, I hope. So I'm not going to talk too long. As far as the international human rights, there's wonderful international human rights instruments. The problem is the UN members themselves that do not respect, and as they have a charter of the UN that they're supposed to respect, and none of them respect it. Whether it's the Convention on Biodiversity, which is a joke, as far as I'm concerned, the Nagoya Protocol is the worst thing that happened to farmers and Indigenous peoples. It doesn't even recognize us as being self-determining. You have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is a landmark declaration. And yes, it's aspirational, but so was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that came after World War II. It's a matter of how you implement it, put those actions into words. And I think that's another part and component that's lacking in the education system, is what are human rights? What are your obligations as well? And to get the UN member states to have some kind of mechanisms that forces them to uphold their treaty obligations as UN members, because it's costly. We as Indigenous people cannot take Canada to court for the genocide it created because we're not a state. So there's a lot of weaknesses, but I think as a foundation, it's something. It's the states themselves that are corrupt, and so we need to work on it, because the UN doesn't just belong to. It's starting to belong to multinationals. They register as NGOs, but we as the people of this planet, we should be demanding more. We should be educating ourselves more on these wonderful human rights instruments, and as Indigenous people, using it with our customary laws, like the Great Law of Peace, because we cannot separate ourselves from those customary laws. So I think that's it. Thanks.